Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and with me today is Jason Rebholz. Jason is a CISO over at Corvus Insurance. Jason, welcome.
Hey, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on. Jason, could you give our audience a little background on yourself and how you came to be where you are today, professionally speaking?
Yeah, sure. So I've had a pretty interesting journey. I always tell people I was born and raised in incident response. So I started my career off at Mandiant, where I started learning about forensics. When I showed up day one, I was actually thinking I was going to be doing some pen testing. And sure enough, I was handed a hard drive and they said, hey, tell us everything that happened on this system. And so thankfully just fell in love with forensics and was there for about 6 years or so. And during that time, did a bunch of investigations into nation state threats, did a bunch of investigations into organized crime, specifically credit card theft. And then after that, went and jumped into the startup world. So I did another incident response firm called the Crypsis Group and helped build out their professional services. And that was where I really started to learn more about ransomware and the impact that was having on organizations. And so built that out to really help companies respond to ransomware primarily, but also business email compromise where they're getting phishing emails. And then dabbled in some more startups, doing some partnership and business development, and then co-founded a company called Mox5 that focused in on ransomware recovery. So how do you get a company back up and running from a ransomware incident? And now in my current role, am and focused on internal security. So this is actually the first time for me where I've been in a pure internal focused security role and building out a security program and working to keep my company safe, but at the same time also doing some stuff for the product side. And how do we build technology to help companies stay secure as well and mature their security program?
Awesome. So, as the title of the podcast might imply, we talk a lot about the talent gap. Do you think that it's a real thing? And if so, where and how does it exist?
Yeah, I think it goes without saying that there's a talent gap, right? But I think there's just as much accusations on why that is there than there is actual solutions on, as we were chatting about before. I think the challenge here is that you have a severe shortage of talent already existing in companies. And that is causing a need to try to get things done as quickly as possible. And so, unfortunately, what that means is when it comes to hiring time, these companies are just going and looking for experienced people because they would see, hey, if there's an entry level person coming in, I don't have the time to do my day job as is. How can I take the time to train somebody up? And unfortunately, that is a very short-sighted view and only just perpetuates this problem where we can't get people trained up quick enough to help fill this gap of just available workers who can support a security program.
Yep, absolutely agree. I see it the same way. There's this magical slot of experience that everybody wants to hire. It's like 2 to 10 years of experience. Beyond that, there's less demand. Below that, there's less demand. And that's the magical person that everybody wants to hire. And, like you said, all the teams are short staffed and they need somebody that can hit the ground running in the parlance of pretty much everybody out there. So, how have you as a hiring manager, maybe in your current role, maybe in previous roles, have you been able to justify building that pipeline of entry level people? And if so, how did you do it?
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, I wish I have done it more than I have today, and unfortunately, I'm a victim of my own words here. Where if you're building out something from the very beginning, it can be difficult to try to bring in somebody brand new and get them trained up. Again, short-sighted view, right? I think if you have that opportunity to step back and say, you know what, it might take me 3 months longer to transition things over, but in the long run, I'm going to be saving my company money. I'm going to be setting myself up for success because I'm going to be training somebody up in a way that I know to be the right way. And then, putting them in the position for success. Really, Where I've seen it the best has been back in the consulting world, which is going to seem counterintuitive because if you look at the consulting world right now, specifically incident response, people are just throwing money at the problem to try to pull people from different positions or different companies to bring them over versus investing in people straight out of college, right? And as I said in my background, I got my career started because a consulting company took a chance on me, right? They were not hiring for experience, they were hiring for potential. And so what I found to be the best thing for success is, you know, first off, it starts in the interview processes, right? Stop screening exclusively for the skills that somebody already has and start screening for the potential to learn, right? And so if you can switch that around starting in the interview process, you can position yourself to say, all right, what's this person's capacity to learn? And can I teach them something? And can they get ramped up quickly? Because one, that's going to open the number of candidates that you have available to you. And then two, you're going to be investing in that person. And so once you once you hire them on, it's what's that training program, right? And I'm not talking like the SANS training or anything like that. Like that's great and all, but for your company, how can you get them up to speed as quickly as possible and take whatever academic knowledge that they might have or no knowledge and infuse that knowledge in them so that they can get from 0 to 60 as soon as possible and become a productive member of the team? And it sounds a lot harder than it is because it's work that you have to do before you hire that person. But that's the sort of thing that once you create that system, you now have the runway for new people to come in with little to zero experience and be a productive member of the team fairly quickly.
How do you assess those intangibles like ability to learn quickly or critical thinking ability, stuff like that? I would assume all those things are super important. Even if you're hiring for an entry level job, you're looking for the ability to learn more so than things that they've already learned. How do you, I guess, as a hiring manager, or how would you advise your recruiting teams to evaluate that sort of thing?
Yeah, so you have a couple ways you can look at it, and it's going to depend on the level of experience, right? Because like you should be doing this for anyone you hire, first of all, right? The more experienced people, you can look at some of their historical background and see, from the professional experience side, how are they progressing in their career, and is it looking like, and this is even just from a resume review, right? Is it looking like they're compounding off of their skills? Are they branching out? Are they learning more? You can get a lot from that just based on, even just a few years of experience to see what they're doing. For people who are just getting out of college, say, or if they're just starting to break into cybersecurity, I'm looking for ancillary information to show progression, right? And so this might be, I love looking at projects. What projects have you worked on that you might have taught yourself something, right? Or have stretched a little bit beyond what your current capacity is to just try new things. And then during those conversations, one of my favorite things to ask is, so what did you learn from that? Right. And so it's a very basic question, but when you can get somebody that will go back and really dig deep into the details to understand, yeah, you know what, this is where I failed. And here's what I learned from it, or here's where I succeeded. And this is the takeaway that I had. When you can have a conversation, you can have like an hour-long conversation just on that single question. And when you start to see the excitement that people have behind with the things that they're learning, you can see that, the learning isn't just a job for somebody. Like this is who they are in their fundamental being. And those are the people that more willing to take a bet on, because it's like they just learn as part of who they are, not because somebody is telling them to learn something.
Yeah, you're looking for the information sponges. I think that's super crucial in hiring security people for sure. You mentioned looking for things that somebody's kind of stretching themselves to figure out. It reminds me of a concept in psychology called the zone of proximal development. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, but I'm loving this already. Tell me more.
Yeah, so basically it's the idea that there's a zone just beyond somebody's ability that if they stretch themselves to that point, they learn a lot faster, or they improve a lot more quickly than if they were just doing things at their current level. So it's how people speak to young children. We speak in a difficulty level that's just above their current level of understanding, and it forces them to kind of stretch themselves to understand that level of language that you're putting out there. So if you kind of look for that in somebody's resume, it's like, okay, well, they're a SOC analyst now, but they were studying, how to administer SIMs and stuff like that. That's a good example of somebody that's kind of stretching themselves to get to that next level. So that's just kind of
Yeah. No, I love that. And it's one of my favorite sayings is that growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone, right? And I think this is part of the challenge for a lot of junior people is that they get so scared of failure that they don't even try, right? There are some people that I've met that are trying to break into cybersecurity, and they have done every training under the book, like everything, like more training than I've ever had in my entire career, but they haven't taken that first step to even apply for an internship, right? And so sometimes even training and just taking classes online or whatever, and these are free classes or even paid classes, right? Like sometimes that's still an area of comfort that people don't want to escape out of because they're afraid that, okay, well, what if I can't apply this, right? And so, that's even just like, that stuff is great as from an academic perspective, but what I really love to see is what are you how are you using these skills, right? If you're going and you're watching some YouTube videos on hacking, right? And learning how to use some of the tools that are out there. It's like, great, okay, like what did you do with that, right? Did you go and did you set up your own lab? Did you just try to just play around with it, right? Like it's not looking for did you go and get like this expensive equipment or anything. It's right, like how did you try to take what you've learned and put it into motion? And that to me is like that step where it's just like it's okay not to, or it's okay to move beyond just reading a book, right? Like this is like one of those things where if you read too many books but you don't actually apply the stuff you're reading for it, like what's the point? It's the same thing and as you're learning for cybersecurity, like you have to apply that and stretch yourself because just as you were saying, right? Like if you stay in that area and you don't have somebody that's trying to push you out of that, you're just gonna be there, right? And you're not gonna grow, or not at a pace that is gonna be competitive in the current landscape.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, you always got to be working, always got to be pushing, thinking about results, thinking about applications of the skills that you're learning. I've been a big proponent of telling stories and hiring, and on the recruiting side, telling a story about the hiring manager that is a good example of their really good culture that they're building. Same thing can go for on the candidate side. If you've learned something, okay, great that you learned it, but how did you apply that? And tell a story about how you applied that. Stories really sell, specifics really sell. Being able to weave a story, and that's communication skills too that hiring managers are looking for, that recruiters are looking for, to be able to do that. So that's great. So you'd mentioned that you've had some challenges in hiring over the years. Consulting side, I kind of know what some of those might be, but now you're on the internal side. Could you describe some challenges that you've had in hiring over the years and how you kind of solve some of those?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just getting really clear on what it is you're looking for, right? And I've definitely been guilty of this, where it's just like you create this job description that is like the perfect being, and the problem is that that person doesn't exist, and it's not fair for somebody for you to even think that that person exists, right? And so like right off the bat, you kind of already limiting the pool for yourself. And I think the other side is really you have to remove the external factors from the hiring process. And what I mean by that is you have to remove the demands of your day to day, right? Because you never want to be in the position where you're hiring out of desperation. It is much better for you to take the long road and really be honest with yourself and say, what am I really looking for? And, am I willing to wait to find that? Right. And that's not to say like, push this down the road until you find your unicorn, right? It's like you got to be realistic, get something in there where like you can open it up and have somebody grow into that role, but also be aware like I might take 3 months longer to find this person, or more importantly, and hopefully it goes down this way, is I might take me 3 months longer to train this person, but that's going to help me out in the long run. And so I think that's the biggest learning I've had, and I would say like um, every decision that I've kind of doubled or questioned later on has come down to I was trying to force a round peg into a square hole. Whether it's for the job description itself or just like the person just wasn't the right role. And at the end of the day, like you're always going to spend more time on a bad hire than a good one, right? And so in this case, it's like if you just take your time up front and really get clear on what it is that you want, like you're looking for, and be more open, don't ask for 5 years of experience for an entry level role sort of thing, right? Open up the door a little bit more, but keep the standards that you're looking for and tie in that potential. Like that's how I would have corrected, like, most of the mistakes that I've made on the hiring side.
Awesome. How do you weight? You'd mentioned kind of years of experience. I often hear that as a metric that hiring managers are looking at to evaluate people. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of that because I think years in job doesn't necessarily tell you somebody's ability to do something. It's just how long they've been doing it. Those don't always necessarily correlate or correlate positively. But so where do you weigh in on like certs versus experience versus education? Do you weight one more heavily than the others?
So I almost always will rate the experience that they have over anything else. And I'm not talking years here, right? I'm talking like knowledge, right? And so like I'd much rather see somebody has an exposure to something but can then talk deep about it, right? Cloud is a good example right now. Cloud is still really early, and you have people that can go super deep on it, and almost everybody is throwing cloud something or another on their resume, right? And so I want to have pre-screening questions so that, hey, if you're saying that you do cloud security, like let me ask a question to just kind of suss out how deep that knowledge goes. And usually you can filter out like 95% of the people who just, may have read some, manual on AWS security or something versus the ones that have a little bit more, even if it's not hands-on experience, but they know the fundamentals behind it. That for me is going to go much further than, okay, you went and got a cert in something, right? Because and I don't want to start like the huge cert debate, but maybe we'll go there. Like for me, I've always felt that even from college work, like it's just not the real world per se, right? So like if you've gone and taken a class, if you've gone and gotten a cert, or you've gone to a full degree for this, can you speak to the fundamentals? Do you have a base to build off of? And then I want to scratch the surface and really kind of test the edges of your knowledge. But do you have that like just that internal drive to go and then build from that, right? And so like that sort of thing, that internal drive, and if we can poke out some of the experience, even if you're just fresh, just brand new to security but have dabbled in a couple things, if we can poke at that and see that you've got a little bit of depth there, I would take that over somebody that has just like cert soup any day, because like I don't want to rely on a test per se to tell me if you know something. I really want to dig deep. Like, do you understand it? Like, can you think critically about this topic? Because the rest can all kind of come with that.
Yeah, and I think depending on the subdiscipline of security, cert the desire for certs can weigh heavier than in other subdisciplines. So I've noticed
Yeah.
like in DFIR, it's more about experience than it is about certs. But like in the GRC space, everybody has to be credentialed because that's how they sell their work, is to clients saying, hey, we have all these people with all these certifications. So it seems
But why do you, so let's double click on that for a second. Like, why do you think that is in the GRC world?
it's a good question. It's just always kind of been that way that since I've been recruiting in the field 9 years later. I think it's driven by the consulting firms because, like I said, they're selling work and they have to find a way
Mm,
to differentiate themselves when they're selling people's experience. And it's a good way to kind of, via credentials, just show that your people supposedly have more experience or they have a minimum level of knowledge. I don't necessarily think that that's true or representative. I think you can have a lot of knowledge and not have a cert, but that's just kind of the way it's evolved. Because the consulting firms were kind of in a race to the bottom with rates, and they had to figure out a way to justify their people's experience, especially when
mm.
people were fresh out of college. And there's a lot of junior auditors that they had to say, well, they have some level of knowledge, they have this certification. Uh,
Yep.
so that would be my explanation, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because like I feel like GRC, like GRC is such a wide thing too, right? But, if you look at it, say, just from like a security framework perspective, right? Anybody can go and read a framework and kind of like force their way through it. They might not know like all the right questions to ask. But like for me, that seems like that one in particular just feels like, hey, anyone can kind of force their way through reading it. I don't need that cert to understand it. Like if I was going to go hire a consultant, say, right, and maybe this I'm just a little bit different here, but like I had to like, what projects have you worked on, right? Like, what companies have you worked with? Like, when I'm looking at consultants for my company now, it's like I want to understand. Do you know our industry, right? Have you been in the trenches in like the things that we need to deal with? And there's not a cert that's going to really check the box for that. But I feel like that's just to your point, like there's a lot of companies that don't know the right questions to ask to validate the differences between these consulting firms out there. So, like, oh, you got a cert. Great. That means something. I don't know what it means, but it means something.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean the same could be said of candidates too. You if you don't know the right questions to ask, you'll rely on years of experience or certifications to be able to kind of benchmark and to figure out if somebody has the base level of knowledge. So like how do you come up with good interview questions to assess some of those knowledge areas where, it goes beyond just the certification?
Yeah. So it depends on the position that I'm hiring for. When I was doing incident response, like that was my career. Like I knew incident response left and right, right? So like I could ask the right questions to really dig deep on, do you fundamentally know what you're going to need to do in order to excel at this job, right? And even from those, like you can base it out to get a sense of how quickly can this person ramp up, right? Like, do I need to teach all the base forensic artifacts to you? Which for certain people you might be able to pick up in a couple weeks. For others, it might take a couple months, depending on the level of experience. Um, that is like the easy mode of hiring, right? It's like you're the domain expert. You really can filter in on, do they know their substance that doesn't touch the potential aspect, right? I think the real challenge here, and maybe this is why there's so many larger companies when they're building out teams, like they struggle, is how do you ask the questions for domains you don't understand? Like you are forced to start asking questions that you don't know the answer to, right? And so you have to really start interpreting more of the responses and the thought process, right? So to give you an example of this, when I was hiring my first GRC person, right? Like again, I can go read a security framework and get a gist, like the overall gist of what's in there, but like I've never built out a GRC program before, right? And so like the crutch you automatically go to is, well, tell me what you've done. Like, tell me how you've built out a GRC program before, right? And you can't really tell, like, okay, is that the right way to build it out or is that the wrong way, right? Like, I couldn't tell you because I've never done it myself and I don't know enough about that subject, right? And so then it just goes back to, okay, let me look at that potential. Let me look at, the confidence. Where have they seen things go wrong? Where have they seen things go right, right? And like what I'm trying to suss out there more is how how do they handle scenarios that they just it's in their playbook, right? And then how are they handling scenarios that are fresh and new to them? Like what's that thought process when they're trying to tackle a new problem that we've never dealt with before, right? Like that sort of thing is going to give me a better sense of, does this person know what they're doing or not? And if I can get a good feel from them that they're going to be able to tackle problems that they haven't solved before, I'm going to be more comfortable to put them in a position, maybe, and that's a position maybe that like they got to stretch for as well, because they have that history of finding a new problem, breaking that down, overcoming that, and then building a process or structure or whatever it might be around that to then help others and deal with that again in the future.
So you're kind of applying that idea of investigative mindset from the DFIR world to whatever position you hire for, it sounds like.
I think you might have just classified it there. Yeah, I mean, again, I think this is the important thing too, is that you bring a lot of bias with you, like in everything you do in the hiring process, right? So, like, with my background in investigations, I'm always going to be more geared to somebody that knows all the attacks, right? Because like that's my world, right? But I think to your point, all right, like I intrinsically am always going to be looking at somebody to see how do you find a new problem? How do you break that down? How do you solve for it? That, I mean, that's the investigative process, right? So I think like now I'm more aware of that bias. So I need to be more cognizant of that moving forward. But yeah, I think like for me personally, that's a skill set that extends beyond just defer. Like if you can, and I think it's analytical thinking at the end of the day, right? Or in deductive reasoning. Like if you can take those core skills, there's really nothing you can't do because you can just take that internal process and tackle any new problem that's out there.
Gotcha. So yeah, I'd imagine that you would ask a lot of behavioral questions, scenario-based questions, questions about getting out of your comfort zone and how you handled that. And yeah, you can learn a lot about somebody just by digging into that.
Yeah, I've always found that when you're trying to test the depths of knowledge, you're going to ask more, fact-based questions, if you will, right? It's like they're not the situational ones. It's okay, what are the top three? I'm stuck on this GRC thing now, right? What are the top three requirements in NYDFS, right? That's the New York Department of Financial Services, which any financial company operating in New York has to comply with. If somebody has said that they have done this in the past, they'll be able to answer that, right? And nerves aside and everything like that, if they struggle on that, I'm going to question whether they've actually done that work or not. But if you ask a question around, okay, we have a new framework that just came out, and we don't know anything about it, but we now know that we have to comply with it. What do you do? How do we make sure that we're compliant, and how do you make sure that the business adapts to this, right? That could be a 45-minute answer depending how deep they want to go, right? And like that's a scenario where you just let them run. And like you bake it, I usually will bake in. My favorite is an hour interview because you can really go deep with somebody. And like this type of question, 10 to 15 minutes minimum to allow them that room to really talk through it, right? Because like a good candidate is gonna talk through this process, and they're gonna try to see, okay, well, first I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z, and then I should probably talk to this person to kind of see what I need to do here, and then all the way through, and then that for me is like that's the sweet spot. If somebody can really talk me through that and give me that confidence, which is key, like not enough to just answer it, like give the confidence that like, yeah, I could do this. Like I know what I'm doing here. That's going to be critical. And again, it doesn't matter about your experience, right? Like this could be an entry level question about, hey, you don't know anything about forensics. Well, here's an example. How would you try to tackle this?
Yeah, that's interesting. So given that that would be your interview process or your philosophy as far as interviews, how do you translate that to a job description that's not too needy, but knowing that like those intangibles are super important to you? How does that translate to what you put on a job description? Because I think a lot of job descriptions are too needy. They have way too many must-have requirements, and like you said, you're kind of looking for that unicorn, and that prevents a lot of people from applying if you actually have the job posted, which I'm not a huge fan of. I think in general, recruiters should be going out to the market and finding the ideal matches versus relying on people to apply and then ghosting them. But how do you see that translating those intangibles to a job description, and how do you decide like what to put on the job description itself as far as requirements?
It's a tough thing. I wish I had a good answer, but I don't. I think if I look at the shortcuts that everyone takes, is they just go and look at another job description that kind of fits it and copy paste, right? That does not work, and you find yourselves in positions where it's just like you're not getting the right candidates as a result. So, I think part of this is you got to strike the balance where keep enough specifics so that somebody understands what their roles and responsibilities would be, right? Like let some self selection happen there, where somebody's going to go in and say, okay, like this is how I'd be spending my time, and yeah, that's interesting, or no, that's not interesting, and let that kind of self select out. When you get into like the requirements and stuff, I don't know. It's like I hate school requirements. I hate years of experience. If it's a more senior position, I'll certainly going to do things that are going to touch on the GRC thing again, right? Like I need to know that you're going to have that experience with NYDFS, right? And so you might be able to like pick 3 to 5 things that are the core of the role you're trying to do, and just leave the rest off, right? Because to your point, what ends up happening right now is that you have everyone and their grandmother applying for positions that they're certainly not qualified for, which is fine. I mean, even when I applied to Mandiant, I applied for a role I wasn't qualified for, and they just luck happened where they were looking for new junior hires, right? But like, make sure it's there's something there, and your resume shows that interest. Like, I had an example where for one of the positions, there was a forklift driver that applied for a senior level position. Like, kudos to that person for going out there and trying it. But when you looked at their resume, there was nothing to show anything about cybersecurity, right? Like, that is a waste of everybody's time, including the applicant, right? So like, I think if you can get these roles and responsibilities, have people self-select, you'll get rid of, the ones that most of the people that are like, this isn't the right thing. And then get to the point where it's just like, hey, if there is interest, then you're working with a recruiter, whether that's internal or external, to get a pre-screen in there to see, like, is there something here that is going to hit on all the other intangibles that you can't really put into a job description. And I think you need that human interaction to really suss that out. You're just not going to get that with a dry app.
Yeah, totally agree. How do you make sure that your recruiting team or your HR or whoever's the kind of first point of contact with the person that's applied or the person that they've reached out to, how do you make sure that they're asking the right questions and, looking for the right people, that sort of thing?
A lot of time and energy is the is the answer there. It's the work that you have to do up front, right? So, number one, if I'm doing this pre-screen, I am giving questions, and it's going to be the same questions for every candidate, because you have to have a baseline to be able to compare against. If you change it up every time, it's just, there's too many variables there. So, it goes back to, what's the role? What are the key things that I want to be able to take from this? And are there certain things that it's just like, it's the non-negotiables, right? Like, what are the things that I absolutely need to have somebody check the box on? And I'm going to walk through that with a recruiter. And with that, we're going to look at the first X number of resumes that come in. And I'm going to just mark those things up and share feedback on it. And what you're doing here is that you're creating a profile for an ideal candidate. And this is where it's just like, okay, these are the areas that I really like. Go find more people like this, right? And so, like, this is going into LinkedIn and finding keywords, and this is all your world, not mine, right? But like, how can I arm you with all the right information so that you can narrow that aperture from all of LinkedIn or all like security people on LinkedIn down to, this is the right candidate for me? And then it's feedback. Like, you have to be constantly talking with that recruiter, internal, external, it doesn't matter. But like, you should be having weekly syncs. And if you're getting a ton of apps, you should be talking more, because the quicker you can give that feedback on what's working and what's not, the tighter it gets. And then you just streamline that. And once you find that profile for a role, especially if it's like a greenfield role where you're like in the IR world, right? It's like, I need an IR consulting, right? Once you get that profile, then it's like, it becomes just super smooth, and you can really get it down to where, like, you're not really wasting anyone's time, because you'll know from a resume that there's not going to be good fits before you can get to the pre-screen. When you get on the phone, the recruiter gets on the phone and is having that pre-screen, they'll know we're going to filter out a few more. And so, like, you can just get this down to more of a science.
So you would spend more time on the front end to narrow that down, educate the recruiter, make sure they're on point, and then you're saving time on the back end by not having to interview people that aren't fits, because they've gone through the work and you've gone through the work in the beginning to make sure they're on point. Yeah, that's what I always recommend as well. I think there's always kind of a sense, I know security people are so busy that, if you're already working 60, 70-hour weeks, it's like, well, I don't want to spend the 10 or 30 minutes up front to help a recruiter understand what I need, but you need to, or you're going to spend more time on the back end wasting time. And the recruiters, or I'm sorry, the candidates get frustrated too, because they're like, well, why did you contact me about this role if I'm clearly not a fit? Then you lose some credibility as an employer. And it's so important to make sure that you have good candidate experience and that you're not damaging your employer brand unnecessarily. So every point of contact that any candidate has with anybody on your team or at your organization is important. you got to stay close enough to your recruiters to know that they're not ghosting people, that they're responding to every applicant. I know sometimes that can be challenging, especially if, say, you're hiring for an entry level role and you post a job and you get 500,000 applicants, but you need to figure out a way to get back to every single person, because if you don't, it's going to hurt you. So, have you been able to kind of hire some folks at the entry level, or I guess how are you helping in that respect to try and get more people into the industry?
So I think where I've seen the most success and had the most success is when I was doing consulting, where you can really filter down on the right candidate, right? Because like once you know, you can start going downstream even further to like straight out of school. And like hands down, the best hires I have ever had have been the individuals straight out of college or people who are like 1 to 2 years experience in a different field. Maybe it's some security experience, but not in IR or whatever it is. But like those have been the best hires I've ever made, because like you are required to go off of potential, and when you're required to go off of potential, you have somebody that's self motivated and is just going to do what they need to do to succeed. uh, with the programs that I'm building now, right? Small team, right? And so this is where I struggle with this question of, especially early on, the first couple hires that I made, do I go junior or do I go senior? And ultimately, I ended up going senior. And the decision process behind that was, and this could be right or wrong, right? I'm not saying this is the right way to do it, but okay, you know what? I'm already spread thin, right? And I need somebody that's going to be able to hit the ground running, and it's going to be about the autonomy that I can give you, right? The trade-offs for that is you have increased salaries. Trade-off for that is, you're going to be giving up control. And the trade-off is like there's a much smaller candidate pool for that. So you're looking at a much longer time to hire, right? And so in some situations, that is the right call to make. In other situations, and this is where like it usually is going to come down to, do you have the skill set to mentor them, or do you have the resources available to mentor them? Because like I'm not going to be able to mentor everyone on every single aspect of a security program because I'm just not an expert in every single area, right? But do I have enough company resources where I can get them training? Do I have enough of a network that I can get them connected with other experts that can talk to them and guide them, right? When you have that available and you take the time to set that up, that is when you can start going down to more entry level. And that's where we're looking to go immediately now, to start opening up to either entry level or more junior level, people that, less than 2 years of experience available, and just go straight on potential.
Cool. Yeah, I heard you mention consulting firms, and I tend to say that the onus is on the consulting firms to hire more at the entry level because they can justify it, knowing that they're not paying high salaries and that these people are going to be profit generating and not a cost center, like would be at an internal security team. So I think every MSSP, every consulting firm should have a training program and should be building these people, because it's a lot tougher for internal security teams to justify it, especially when they're kind of in that vicious cycle, like you said, where you need somebody to fill those exact responsibilities. Everybody's already overworked. So, there's no bandwidth to train somebody new. But if you have a company that can justify building a whole class of, every semester, say with a campus recruiting program, like I did when I worked for a consulting firm, we were able to get 12 people every semester, a dozen people every semester, that in 6 months were at most 6 months profit generating for the company. And even if they don't stick around for a year, 2 years, that's a lot of pushback I hear. As long as you're getting them cheap enough, sad to say, but if you get them cheap enough on the salary and you get enough time out of them at your organization, you can justify, building that entry level force. And if you really focus on retention, you can increase that number to a year and a half, and then boom, you're beating out the average retention or turnover in the market, which I would put at around 8 to 12 months, somewhere in there. Like there's a lot of turnover in security. There's just so much salary to be had. Everybody knows that if you want more salary, you have to jump ship every year or so. So if you can figure out a way to give people a promotion path to show them that you actually care about their career progression, to listen to their ideas, a lot of intangibles, a lot of things that don't cost any money. But if you can focus on that retention piece and build a training program, as a consulting firm, it's going to pay off for you in the long run. You just have to temper and balance the junior people, because you're going to have a lot, obviously, if you're doing a training program, have enough good senior people where you do have some seniority on the bench as well. So that's an important balancing act. But you can your average, bill rate basically down a little bit.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And I think there's a few components of this. Like, one, you need to make sure that you have the ability to make those new hires successful, right? Because if you're just chasing the unit economics, you're going to hire people that don't know what they're doing, and you're not going to give them the support, and customers are going to get annoyed with you, and it's just all going to come crumbling down, right? And like, literally in that scenario, nobody wins. So you need to build the program to train people up. But yeah, like, I see so many consulting companies that they just go super top heavy. And honestly, I don't know how they stay in business, because like, you have, and especially in the DFIR side, like, they had a little bit of a luxury because, they're charging $450 an hour. So you can carry a pretty heavy salary bench there on that, as long as the work keeps coming in. But guess what? When that work slows down, you have people sitting on the bench, you're also the first to tank, because you're carrying so much bloat there. So, especially in consulting, and maybe not all forms of consulting, but specifically in the incident response world, you have so much velocity that you can get people trained up very quickly, because in a matter of 3 months, you can have them on 10, 15, 20, 30 engagements, seeing different things. And you can break down a lot of these tasks into very straightforward things. Okay, you know what? New hire, go in, maybe it's week one. We're going to teach you all about incident response. We're going to teach you the process. We're going to teach you the artifacts. Like, we are going to get it so that you have all the pieces of information you need to go into phase two, which is, let's get you some live fire ammunition here, right? Like, we're going to get you doing some live response. Like, I'm going to jump on a tangent here. Like, the way that I used to train people in IR was, you get them in, you teach them the fundamentals, give them the artifacts, everything like that. You then give them an old system that you've analyzed before, you personally, right? And you get them to go through and say, I want you to go do a full analysis on this, and I want you to write a report based on everything you just learned. And then you're going to sit down with that individual after they do that and say, okay, great. Here's what you did right. Here's what you missed. And here's how you make sure you don't miss that again. And you do that 2 or 3 times, a few more if they need it, right? And then it goes on to the next stage. We're going to give you a system on a live engagement. And this is where you hit the billable time, right? And this could be a matter of days. It could be a matter of weeks, depending on the individual and their skill set. So when they're going live, now they just go into a mode where they're going to go through, do their analysis, and you're going to have somebody come back in and say, I might have to redo some of this, but I'm going to go through and sit down with you again, and you're going to tell me everything that you looked at on that system. And we're going to look at and double check your work along the way. And every piece of that is a learning opportunity for that individual. And all that at that point is billable, right? And so, to your point, consulting companies have literally zero excuse not to have these types of training programs. And that's why, and I'm super biased for this, right? But like, if you want, as a new person jumping into security, want to get started, I don't think that there is a better way to do it than consulting. It can be a grind, right? So like, you're sacrificing some work-life balance there for a speed to knowledge, right? And like, you are going to potentially work very hard. You're potentially going to have a lot of things thrown at you, but you also are potentially going to learn more than you will ever learn in industry. And then it's just like, get in, get those learnings. And if the company you're working with is a solid one, they have a good retention program, they take care of you, not only with a promotion path, but financially, everything that is ticking the boxes that are important for you and your growth, stay there, get a little bit more experience, and then go into industry and find something. Like that, for me, again, biased, is my favorite path to do it, because I think you learn the quickest. But obviously, there are just equally as important ways and great ways to learn if you're going straight into industry.
Yep. And I always advise people, same thing, go into consulting if you can early on in your career. You're going to learn way more than if you were on an internal security team somewhere, just out of sheer necessity, they're going to throw a lot at you for good and for bad. But yeah, that's a great place to start. So you'd mentioned retention. Obviously, that's super important in security. There's a lot of turnover. People are always jumping for more money. How do you hang on to people knowing that the market is what it is and people are going to get offers for more money?
So, I mean, a lot of it is you can try to flush out what the career aspirations are at the start, right? Is the best fit for somebody joining your team is somebody that is going to be able to join and you're going to participate in their journey of growth. And so, you should. I think it's stupid for companies to look at this where it's just like you're going to get a lifer. Like it's just not the reality anymore. Like we're not working at AT&T, Bell, or Bell South, whatever it is anymore. Where like people are like working there for 50 plus years. Like it's just stupid. So now it's like, how do you look at this? I think Reid Hoffman uses this phrase, the tours of duty, right? It's like, is this an area where I can allow you to come in and flourish and grow your career? And as a byproduct of that, I'm going to help accomplish something that I need to get done as well. Because when you can find that symbiotic relationship, like that's the right recipe. And you're going to get people at different points in their career, and that's okay. And some are going to jump sooner rather than later. But if you can foster an environment of growth, if you can foster an environment of opportunity, and you foster an environment of reward too, where like financially we're going to take care of you, we're going to give you the resources, you're going to get time off, you're going to be able to grow personally and professionally. I think that gives you that runway. But I don't believe in trying to stop people from leaving if it's a better opportunity for them, right? Like I would much rather, if they don't want to stay there anymore, or they're struggling with something, it's like, hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't the right fit for you. Maybe there's something that was missed during the hiring process. Maybe I'm not in the position to give you what you need to continue your growth. It's at that point it becomes, how can I help you advance in your career? Because at the end of the day, like you shouldn't be fighting against the current here, because then everybody's going to drown.
I agree. Yeah, because if you try so hard to retain somebody who doesn't want to be there, you end up breeding toxicity, and that bleeds over into
Yeah.
the rest of the team. And that's why I think it's so important to stay in front of your employees, have a good sense of the way the winds are blowing within the culture of your team. If you get a sense that somebody's not happy, you need to be able to sit down and have the trust in the relationship with that employee to sit down and ask them, what's going on? Is there anything I can do? And, like you said, there may be a situation where you can't do anything and it's just time for them to move on. But at least getting ahead of that, and say you give them the blessing to start looking for a new job, then you have more time to backfill that role versus trying to be reactive and getting caught off guard when somebody leaves. And then you're in that constant vicious cycle of having to backfill somebody with really specific skills. So if you can get ahead of that and realize that not everybody's going to be there forever and embrace that instead of just reacting all the time, yeah, you'll be better off.
Yeah. I think too, it's if you have somebody that leaves and you're surprised by it, like that is your failure as a leader, because you should not be surprised by that. One, it's either you're not paying close enough attention to how the team is doing, and maybe you're willfully ignoring it because you don't have a choice. But two is, are you not fostering enough trust and communication within the team, right? Like I'd much rather have somebody on my team come to me in a professional manner, say, hey, this isn't really working, like I'm struggling here, right? Because for me, my job as a leader is to make sure that my team succeeds, right? And I'm the bulldozer for them. How can I remove the problems that you're facing so that you can do what you need to do here, right? Because their success is my success. And so yeah, if I get blindsided, the first thing I'm doing is asking myself, what did I miss? What did I do wrong here, right? Because there's certainly been situations where I've had team members where it wasn't the right fit for them, and I overcoached, right? It's like, I can fix this, I can fix this. And at the end of the day, like some things aren't fixable, and that is okay, right? And so to your point about toxicity, like there are some people that stay on teams way too long because whether they're afraid of change or whatever it is, and then everybody suffers as a result. So like, let's have the adult conversation and get to what needs to happen, and just get everybody in a position where, they are comfortable and they're going to succeed, and that might not be at your company.
Yep. That's a great philosophy. I think I wish more hiring managers had that philosophy, but there's a reason that I always liked working with you, Jason. So that's a great place to kind of wrap up. Just one last question that I ask everybody: what are people not talking about, but they should be within the field of security, and specifically to hiring, if you can?
I think it's honestly about the training programs, right? Like, if we need to change the conversation around the talent gap to, not how do we fix it through job descriptions, but how do we fix it so that it's, we are enabling people to succeed from ground zero, right? And I don't think there's enough. I think there's chatter about it, but I think it's all self-serving chatter for selling boot camps and crap like that. Like, let's actually get it to where companies are investing the amount of one headcount into a program to build other people up and help them succeed in that in your company. Like, that investment is going to pay dividends forever if you can get it and you get it right.
That's for sure. It's a massive investment up front, and it can be tough to sometimes swallow those costs. But if you can get it off the ground in the long run, like you said, it's going to pay off. So that's awesome. Well, appreciate you being on, Jason. Great talking to you again. And to everybody else out there, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pete.
All righty. Bye-bye.